I'll never forget that moment. It happened so fast, but it felt like time stood still. There I was, standing in the HOA office, minding my own business, when Karen, the HOA worker, looked me up and down with that smug expression of hers. She didn't know who I was. She didn't care. To her, I was just some nobody. Without any warning, she slapped me. Hard. The sound echoed in the otherwise quiet office, and I stood there stunned. For a brief second, I couldn't believe what had just happened. But the more I looked at her, the more I realized. This woman had no idea who she was messing with. The slap wasn't just the physical hit that stung my cheek. It was her attitude, the way she thought she could get away with anything, just because she was behind the counter. She had no idea that the nobody she slapped was actually the CEO of the company that managed this entire neighborhood's properties. The shock of it hit me like a ton of bricks, but instead of responding with anger or retaliation, I stayed calm. "You don't know who I am, do you?" I asked quietly, looking her straight in the eyes. Her arrogant smirk didn't falter. "No, and I don't care," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But there was something behind her eyes that made me pause. It wasn't fear, not yet anyway. It was more like disbelief, like she couldn't possibly comprehend that someone like me could walk into the HOA office and not be just another homeowner. I couldn't let this go. Not just for myself, but for anyone else who might have been treated the same way. But I knew I had to play this carefully. She needed to know exactly who I was, but only when the time was right. I turned around, walked to the counter, and calmly pulled out my business card from my pocket. I didn't need to make a scene. Yet. I placed the card on the desk in front of her, and when she glanced down at it, her face went white. It was the CEO card, clear and undeniable. My name, David Brooks, was printed in bold letters along with the title of the company I ran. I watched her face change from smug confidence to a quick flicker of panic, but I didn't let her off the hook that easily. I smiled just enough to show that I knew exactly what had happened and how much it was about to cost her. "You might want to think twice about how you treat people in this office. I run the show here, not you." The words hung in the air like a warning. Her jaw tightened as she stared at the card for a moment longer, and then she quickly slid it back toward me, almost as if trying to avoid touching it. I didn't know. I'm sorry." But I wasn't there for her apology. I had a bigger plan in mind. The shock on her face was just the beginning of what I had in store for her and the rest of the HOA office. The sound of a phone ringing in the background made her turn away for a split second, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. "You're lucky that was all you did, but it's not over yet," I said, keeping my voice even. Her eyes widened in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, the arrogance fading. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I turned to leave, but not before making sure she knew she was far from being out of the woods. I took a deep breath, letting the tension of the moment settle around me. What I did next would change everything. I wasn't going to let this go quietly, and I wasn't going to let anyone think they could treat people like that ever again. The door clicked shut behind me, but it wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. I still had to figure out what to do about Karen. As I made my way down the hall, I could hear the muffled sound of her scrambling to explain herself to her boss, probably trying to cover up what had just happened. But I had more than just a plan. I had a mission now. A mission to stand up for the people who were always pushed aside by the arrogance of others. For too long, the HOA had been a place where entitled people got away with bullying others. But that was going to change, and I was going to make sure of it. The question now wasn't whether I could handle Karen's little slap. It was what I would do next. And Karen was about to find out that I wasn't the nobody she thought I was. I turned the corner, my mind racing with the possibilities, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else get away with this. Not on my watch. That was just the beginning. But what would happen when I confronted the entire HOA about this incident? How would they react when they found out that the nobody they had mistreated was actually someone they couldn't afford to mess with? The tension was only building, and the next chapter would bring even more surprises. The following day, I arrived at the HOA office with a different mindset. Yesterday's incident had left a mark on me, something that told me I couldn't let this go. Karen thought she could slap me and get away with it, thinking I was just another faceless homeowner. But what she didn't know was that I was the one in charge of the HOA, the one who made the final calls on everything. I wasn't about to let her or anyone else forget that. I walked into the office calmly, as if yesterday's slap hadn't even happened, though my mind was racing with what I planned to do next. As I entered, Karen wasn't at her desk, and the room felt oddly quiet. I headed straight for the front desk, where another worker, a woman named Linda, sat. "Hey, Linda," I greeted her. "Is Karen around?" Linda looked up, her expression almost unreadable. "Oh, she's in a meeting right now. She's been a little shaken up, actually." I raised an eyebrow. "Shaken up?" She hesitated, clearly not wanting to get into details. "Yeah, she's been apologizing nonstop about what happened yesterday. I'm sure she feels terrible about it." I felt a rush of cold satisfaction. Karen was nervous now. The arrogant attitude she had displayed yesterday was slipping away. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't about Karen's apology. This was about making sure she understood the weight of her actions. "Look, Linda," I began, keeping my voice even, "I need you to pass along a message to Karen. Tell her that I'm scheduling a meeting with her boss today. And I'll be bringing this up with the board as well. We need to talk about how things are run around here." Linda's eyes widened at the mention of the board. "The board? You're really going that far?" "Yes," I said firmly. "This isn't just about me. This is about the kind of environment we have here, the way people are treated. If things like this can happen to me, who else is being mistreated? I'm not going to stand for it." Linda didn't respond immediately. She looked like she was debating whether or not to speak her mind, but eventually she nodded slowly. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll let her know." I turned and made my way back to the lobby, where I waited for Karen to come out of her meeting. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. I could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation, as if everyone knew something was about to change, but didn't know exactly what. It wasn't long before Karen emerged, her eyes scanning the room before they landed on me. Her face went pale, and for a split second, I could see the old, arrogant Karen trying to come back, but it was too late. She knew I had the upper hand now. "David," she said, her voice almost a whisper. I'm really sorry about yesterday. I shouldn't have." I raised a hand, cutting her off. "It's not enough for you to apologize. This goes beyond a slap. This is about how you treat people, and how you think you can treat them without any consequences." Karen shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. She had crossed a line, and now it was time for her to understand that. "I've already spoken with Linda," I continued, my voice steady, "and I'm meeting with your boss today. The board will be involved as well. I'm making sure this doesn't happen again." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. She seemed frozen, realizing the gravity of the situation. "Please, David," she finally said. "I never meant for it to get this far." I looked at her, but this time, I didn't feel angry. I just felt resolute. "It's already too late for that. We'll see where this goes." As I turned to leave, I could hear her call out quietly behind me. I really am sorry." But I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Her apology didn't change anything. The damage was done. I left the office and walked down the corridor, my thoughts racing. The power I held in this situation was clear, but it wasn't about making Karen pay. It was about making sure no one else had to suffer the same treatment. The board meeting would be the real test. How would they respond? Would they back up Karen's actions, or would they stand with me? As I left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Karen may have been the first, but she wouldn't be the last. There were others who needed to know that things were about to change around here. That afternoon, I received a call from the HOA president, John Miller. "David, I understand you want to meet about what happened with Karen. I want to make sure we handle this appropriately. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. "Tomorrow works," I said, my voice calm. "I'll be there." The call ended, and I sat back in my chair, the weight of the situation sinking in. What would happen when I walked into that meeting? Would they side with me, or would they defend Karen's actions? I didn't know, but I was ready to find out. I had no intention of backing down. The tension was thick in the air, and I knew the next chapter would be a turning point. The real showdown was just beginning. The next morning came quickly. My nerves were steady, but I couldn't shake the sense that everything was about to change. Today wasn't just about confronting Karen, it was about changing the culture of the HOA and the way people like her were allowed to behave. The meeting with the board was the first step in that process. I arrived at the HOA office, the tension in the air palpable. As I walked down the hall toward the conference room, I could hear the low murmur of voices. The board members had already gathered. I wasn't sure who exactly was on my side yet, but I knew that if I didn't stand firm, nothing would change. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room went silent as all eyes turned to me. At the table sat John Miller, the HOA president, along with several other key board members, including Carla Thompson, the treasurer, and Greg Willis, the legal advisor. Karen was there too, sitting near the back, looking a little pale and uncomfortable. "David," John greeted me, his tone neutral, but with a hint of concern. "We've been briefed on the situation. Let's hear your side of the story." I walked to the front of the room, standing tall. "I'm here because of what happened yesterday." Karen slapped me. "And while I understand that this may seem like a personal issue, it's bigger than that. This is about how people are treated here, how Karen treated me, and how she probably treats others behind closed doors. This isn't an isolated incident, it's a symptom of a much larger problem." I could see the board members exchange looks. Some of them seemed uncomfortable, while others looked more confused than anything else. Karen, on the other hand, was sitting stiffly in her chair, her eyes avoiding mine. "David," John began again, his voice calm but firm, "we take allegations like this seriously, but we need to ensure that we're making decisions based on the facts. We can't just act on emotions." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm not here to make this about emotions. I'm here to make sure that the treatment of homeowners, of people like me, is fair and respectful. The issue isn't just the slap. It's the mindset that allowed Karen to think she could get away with something like that. And I have to ask, what kind of environment are we fostering if we let this kind of behavior slide?" Greg Willis, the legal advisor, shifted in his seat. "I understand your concerns, David, but before we make any decisions, we need to get both sides of the story. Karen, why don't you explain what happened from your perspective?" The room fell silent as Karen finally spoke, her voice shaky but trying to remain composed. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was upset and I made a mistake. I don't even know why I did it. I was just frustrated with everything, and it all built up. I didn't think." I could feel the sting of her words. She didn't think? That was the problem. She had acted out of frustration and thought she could take it out on me, someone she perceived as nobody. I wanted to scream at her, but I kept my composure. This wasn't the time to let emotion take control. John looked at me then, his gaze steady. "David, I appreciate your willingness to address this, but we need to move forward with the proper process. We'll review the facts and discuss this with Karen before making any decisions." I could feel my frustration rising. It wasn't enough. I needed more than just words, I needed action. But I didn't argue. Not yet. There was a plan in motion, and I had to trust it. I understand, I said, my voice calm despite the heat in my chest. But I want to make it clear that I'm not letting this go. Karen needs to understand that actions like this have consequences, and so do the rest of you. This isn't just about Karen anymore. It's about everyone who's been treated unfairly or belittled by the system you've built here. There was a moment of silence, and I could see a shift in the room. Some of the board members were beginning to understand where I was coming from. It wasn't just about one incident. It was about the overall culture of the HOA, about the way power was being abused. "We will review everything carefully," John said, though I could tell there was a trace of unease in his voice. "But I want to assure you, David, that we're committed to making the right decisions here. We will have another meeting in a week to discuss the next steps." I nodded, though I wasn't completely satisfied. But it was a start. "Thank you," I said, turning to leave the room. As I stepped outside, I felt a sense of accomplishment mixed with frustration. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But just as I was about to head out the door, I heard John's voice calling after me. "David, hold on." I turned around, my heart racing. What now? John motioned for me to come back into the room. When I stepped inside, he motioned for the others to leave. Once we were alone, he looked at me with a serious expression. "I just want to say that I appreciate your passion," John said quietly. "But this could get complicated. There are people on the board who are very protective of Karen. You might find it harder to get support than you think." I wasn't surprised. There were always going to be people who would defend Karen, who would make excuses for her behavior. But I wasn't backing down. I had to see this through. "I understand," I said, "but I'm not going to stop until things change." John sighed, but there was a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "I'll do what I can to help. But you need to be prepared. Not everyone will be on your side." I left the office, feeling a mix of emotions. The fight wasn't over yet, and I had a feeling things were only going to get more intense from here. As I walked out of the building, I noticed a group of residents gathered near the entrance, whispering to each other. They were talking about the meeting. Word had already spread. People knew what had happened with Karen, and they were eager to see what would come next. I took a deep breath and walked past them, my mind focused on what lay ahead. The board meeting had been just the beginning. The real challenge was still to come. As I reached my car, I pulled out my phone and saw a message from Linda, one of the other HOA workers. The message was short, but it sent a chill down my spine. "Karen's been telling everyone you're out to get her. She's plotting something. Watch your back." I knew then that I couldn't trust Karen, or anyone who sided with her. The battle was far from over, but I was ready. The real test was still ahead. The following days were filled with tension. I had expected Karen to try and get the board members on her side, but what I didn't anticipate was how quickly things would escalate. The HOA office felt colder whenever I walked through the door, and it wasn't just the air conditioning. It was the way people looked at me, like I was now some sort of enemy, someone they couldn't trust. Word had spread fast. And Karen? She was doing everything she could to turn the situation around, to paint herself as the victim. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing on me as I sat in my office, going over notes for the upcoming meeting. The board was set to meet again in a few days, and I had to prepare myself for whatever Karen was going to throw at me. But as I scrolled through emails, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Linda again. "David, I overheard Karen talking to Greg. She's trying to get you fired. She says you're making things up and trying to ruin her career. I don't know what she's planning, but I thought you should know." I read the message twice, feeling my stomach drop. It wasn't just about a slap anymore. Karen was trying to destroy my reputation, to turn the entire situation on its head. I had known she was capable of underhanded tactics, but this? It was personal. I stared at the phone screen, trying to wrap my mind around what Linda had just told me. If Karen was going this far, I needed to act fast. I couldn't let her win, not after everything that had happened. I stood up and paced around my office. My mind was racing. I needed to get ahead of this, to make sure that the board saw through her lies. But I had to be smart about it. If I came off too aggressive, it would backfire. I had to be methodical. I had to be calm. That's when I remembered something. A few months ago, Karen had made a mistake that no one had noticed at the time. A small mistake, but it could be used to discredit her. She had mismanaged a community event, one that had resulted in some complaints from residents. It was minor, but it was enough. And if I played my cards right, it could be the leverage I needed to expose her for the fraud she really was. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone, dialing Greg's number. I needed to speak with him, to find out what was going on from his perspective. He was a level-headed guy, and if anyone could help clear the air, it would be him. "Greg," I said when he picked up, trying to keep my voice calm. "We need to talk about Karen." There was a pause on the other end before Greg spoke. "I figured you'd be calling. I've been hearing a lot of things, David, things I don't like." I leaned back in my chair, trying to get comfortable. "What kind of things?" "Karen's been telling everyone that you're after her job. She's saying you're making false accusations and trying to get her fired. She's convinced that you're targeting her personally." I felt my blood pressure rise at the thought of Karen spinning this entire situation to her advantage. "That's ridiculous. She's the one who slapped me. She's the one who started this whole mess." "I know that," Greg said. "But Karen's good at playing the victim, and the board, well, let's just say they're listening to her. I'm not sure where this is going, David. She's got some people on her side." I clenched my fists. "So, what do we do?" Greg sighed. "I don't know. But I do know this. Karen's trying to paint you as the bad guy. And the more she talks, the more she's twisting the truth. You've got to be careful how you handle this. If it gets out of hand, it could turn into a whole different situation." I stared out the window, thinking about what he said. He was right. If I didn't act fast, Karen could ruin me. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "I need your help. I've got something that could turn this around. I'm going to need you to help me present it at the next board meeting." "I'm listening," Greg replied. "I have proof that Karen mismanaged a community event a few months ago," I said. "If we bring that up, it'll show the board that she's not as reliable as she's making herself out to be. I don't want to destroy her career, but she's forcing my hand." Greg was silent for a moment. "That's a bold move, David, but it might be the only way to keep her from turning this into something worse." "I'm not playing games anymore," I said firmly. "I need this to end." "All right," Greg said. "I'll help you, but you need to be careful. If we bring that up, it'll escalate things even further. We'll have to be prepared for the fallout." "I'm ready for it," I replied. "Thanks, Greg." I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, thinking about what I had just set in motion. This was going to be a game of chess, and Karen had no idea what was coming. The next morning, as I made my way to the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier, the tension in the office palpable. It was only a matter of time before the board meeting would happen, and I had a feeling Karen was already preparing for battle. When I arrived, I found Linda waiting for me by the front desk. She looked anxious, glancing over her shoulder before walking over to me. "David," she whispered, "I think Karen's trying to sabotage you. I overheard her talking to Carla. She's planning to bring up some old accusations against you. Something about your management style and how you run things. She's digging up dirt." I felt my stomach turn. Karen wasn't going down without a fight, but I wasn't about to let her take me down. "I'm not worried about that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've got something she won't expect." Linda looked at me, concern in her eyes. "Just be careful, David. She's dangerous. I don't think she'll stop until she gets what she wants." I nodded, feeling a new sense of resolve wash over me. She doesn't know who she's dealing with. But as I turned to head into the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even messier. And just as I stepped into the room, I saw Karen's smug face watching me from across the table, ready for the next round. The battle was heating up, and I was ready to play my next move. What would happen when the truth came out? Would it be enough to stop Karen, or was I walking straight into a trap of her making? The suspense was thick, and the stakes were higher than ever. The board meeting that day felt like a ticking time bomb, and I was bracing myself for the explosion. I had made my move, and now it was time to see if it would pay off. The room was filled with tension, each person present watching the others closely, unsure of where their loyalty would lie once everything came to light. I could feel the weight of the situation as I entered the conference room. Karen was sitting near the front, her eyes narrowed at me with an intensity that made my stomach churn. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. She was plotting something, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw at me. John Miller, the HOA president, opened the meeting, his voice calm but strained. "All right, everyone, we're here to discuss the ongoing situation with Karen and David. Let's keep it civil and focused. We need to make decisions that are in the best interest of the HOA." The words hung in the air as I looked around the table. I could see Carla Thompson, the treasurer, giving Karen a subtle nod of encouragement. Greg, who had promised to help me, sat back with a neutral expression, his arms crossed. He was waiting for the right moment to jump in, but I could tell he was already worried about the direction the meeting might take. I cleared my throat, ready to present the evidence I had. "Thank you, John. I've gathered information regarding the event that Karen mismanaged a few months ago. I'm not here to destroy her or her career, but I think it's important that everyone knows the kind of behavior we're dealing with." Karen shot me a look, one that could only be described as pure venom. But I didn't let her intimidate me. This was my moment. "I'm not making these accusations lightly. I've spoken to several residents who complained about the event, and I've gathered documents that prove Karen didn't handle the situation properly. She failed to meet the expectations set for the event, and it led to unnecessary problems for the community." I pulled out a folder from my bag, placed it on the table, and slid it toward John. "These are the records, emails, reports, and a few other pieces of evidence. I think they speak for themselves." John glanced down at the folder, and the room went silent. Everyone was waiting, holding their breath. This was the moment where things could go either way. Karen tried to recover quickly, her voice sharp. "That event was a disaster, yes, but I did the best I could under the circumstances. David is using this to distract from the real issue. What happened with him yesterday? That's the real story. He's trying to destroy me, and I'm not going to let him." I didn't let her get away with it. "This isn't about me trying to destroy you, Karen. This is about accountability. You can't walk around treating people however you want and then turn around and act like the victim. That's not how this works." I could see the board members glancing at each other, some visibly uncomfortable with the growing tension, but I wasn't going to let it go. I had the facts, and I wasn't backing down. Greg finally spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "David's right. This isn't just about one mistake. It's about the culture we've been allowing to fester in the HOA. People like Karen, who think they're untouchable, need to be held accountable. I've seen the records. The complaints are valid. And if we let this slide, we're sending the message that this kind of behavior is acceptable. It's not." Karen's face turned red, but she didn't speak. She knew she had been caught, and I could see the shift in the room. The board members were starting to see through her act. John nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "All right. I think we need to take a break and review these documents. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes to make a decision." As the room cleared, I sat back, letting out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But the victory was short-lived. I could feel Karen's eyes on me as she made her way to the door, her posture stiff, like a predator waiting to pounce. "Don't think this is over, David," she hissed under her breath. "I'll make sure you regret this." I didn't respond, I didn't need to. She had already revealed her true nature, and I wasn't afraid of her anymore. As I sat there, waiting for the meeting to resume, I thought about the consequences of what I had just done. The board was clearly on my side, but Karen wasn't going to go down quietly. I had exposed her for what she was, a manipulative, vindictive person who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. But that wasn't the end of the story. I still had to figure out what she was going to do next, and I wasn't about to let my guard down. When the board reconvened, I could see the shift in the room. The board members who had been uncertain before were now looking at Karen with suspicion. John stood at the head of the table, his expression more serious than before. "We've reviewed the evidence," he said, his tone firm, "and it's clear that Karen's actions were inappropriate. We'll be taking this matter up with HR, and she will be facing consequences for her behavior." Karen's face was a mask of fury. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This isn't over. You'll all regret this." Her voice was filled with rage, but it was clear to everyone in the room that she had lost. Her manipulations had been exposed, and now she was scrambling to salvage whatever she could. But it was too late. The board was done with her. The decision was made. I felt a surge of relief flood through me, but it was tempered with caution. I knew Karen wasn't the type to go down without a fight. There would be more to this story, and I had to be prepared for whatever came next. As I left the meeting, I felt the weight of the situation lift slightly from my shoulders. I had won, but the battle wasn't over. I could feel the undercurrent of tension still swirling around me. The real challenge would come when I had to rebuild trust, not just in the HOA, but in myself. And just as I thought the worst was over, I got a text from Linda. "David, Karen just made a call to a reporter. She's going public with this. Watch your back." My heart sank. Karen wasn't just going to let me walk away from this. She was escalating the fight. The war wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. I had no choice but to brace myself for what was coming next. The real battle, the one that could make or break everything, was just starting. I was ready for it. Or at least, I thought I was. The news hit faster than I expected. Within hours of Karen's call to the reporter, the story was everywhere. Local news stations picked it up, social media exploded, and before I knew it, the HOA was under a microscope. My reputation, the one I had worked so hard to build, was being torn apart piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Karen had gone public, claiming that I was trying to destroy her career out of some personal vendetta. She painted herself as the victim, the innocent woman who had been unfairly targeted by the CEO, and it was working. Too well. People were siding with her, believing the narrative she had spun. I sat at my desk, staring at my phone, reading the comments, the angry posts, the messages. The backlash was intense, and it was coming from all sides. The HOA board had backed me, but the public didn't care. The media was sensationalizing the entire situation, blowing everything out of proportion. They didn't care about the truth. They only cared about the drama. I was losing control. But just as I was about to give up and shut my phone off, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a video, a clip from the HOA office, posted by someone who had been recording during the meeting. The footage showed Karen in a much different light than she had portrayed herself. It showed her speaking to a group of employees, laughing about the way she had manipulated the board and the residents. She bragged about how she had played the victim to get what she wanted. That was it. The moment I had been waiting for. This video, this proof, was the smoking gun I needed to end this madness once and for all. I grabbed my jacket and stormed out of the office, heading straight for the media outlet that had first picked up the story. I wasn't about to let Karen control the narrative anymore. I was going to show the world the truth, and I was going to do it on my terms. When I arrived, I was met by a reporter, a young woman with an inquisitive expression. "David Brooks, I presume?" she asked, holding out her hand. "That's me," I said, shaking her hand firmly. "I need you to air something, now." She looked at me, clearly curious. "What's going on?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the video. "I've got proof that Karen has been lying to everyone. I want this to go live immediately. The truth needs to come out." The reporter's eyes widened as she watched the video, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. "This is huge," she said quietly. "I'll get this on air right now." I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it, the final move. If this video went viral, Karen wouldn't have a leg to stand on. She'd be exposed, and everything she had tried to do to me would unravel. I just had to be patient and wait for the fallout. It wasn't long before the video hit the news. The story spread like wildfire. People were outraged, and Karen's carefully constructed persona crumbled in front of the entire community. She had been caught in her own lies, and there was no turning back now. The next few days were a blur. The media was all over it, and Karen's attempts to backtrack were futile. The board held an emergency meeting, and Karen was immediately suspended pending further investigation. Her career in the HOA was over, but just when I thought the dust was settling, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in my office, finally able to relax for the first time in what felt like forever, when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered it anyway. "David, this is Greg," he said, his voice tight. "I need you to come down here now." My heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" "There's something you need to see," Greg said, and I could hear the urgency in his tone. "It's about Karen." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door, heading for the HOA office. My mind raced, wondering what could possibly be left to deal with. When I arrived, Greg was waiting for me by the entrance, looking pale. "Follow me," he said, leading me down the hall to the conference room. Inside, the room was dark, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. The board members were seated around the table, their faces grave. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice low. John Miller, the HOA president, looked at me with a mix of disbelief and concern. "David, I don't know how to say this, but it seems like Karen's actions go even deeper than we thought. There's evidence that suggests she had been embezzling funds from the HOA for months." My blood ran cold. "What?" Greg stepped forward, holding up a folder. "We've gone through the financial records. There's a pattern of missing funds, small amounts here and there, but it adds up to thousands of dollars." I could barely process what I was hearing. Karen had been embezzling money. How had she gotten away with it for so long? "We're going to need to report this to the authorities," John said, his voice firm, "and we'll have to take legal action." But even as the words left his mouth, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something bigger at play. I turned to Greg. "What else do we not know?" Greg hesitated. "There's something else. Karen didn't just stop with the funds. There's a trail leading to a number of falsified documents, fake invoices. She was laundering money through the HOA accounts. It's bigger than we thought." I felt the room spin as the weight of the situation hit me all at once. Karen had been playing a dangerous game, and she had nearly ruined everything. But now, everything was coming to light. Just as I thought things couldn't get crazier, the door to the conference room burst open. It was Karen. But this time, she wasn't just angry. She was panicked. "You don't understand," she screamed, her voice breaking. "I had no choice. You don't know what they would have done to me." She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't want to do it, but they made me. They told me I had to or else." "Who?" I demanded, stepping forward. "Who made you do it?" But before she could answer, the door behind her slammed shut, and I heard sirens approaching. The authorities had arrived. In that moment, everything changed. The fight was over, but the story wasn't. The truth had come out, but the consequences were just beginning. Karen had been caught, and there was no escaping the fallout. But as I stood there, Watching the chaos unfold around me, I realized something. I hadn't just won a battle. I had fought for something bigger, something that could change everything for the people who had been pushed aside, the ones who had been ignored and mistreated. And in the end, that was what truly mattered. Karen's empire was crumbling, and it was time for a new era at the HOA. One where power couldn't be abused, and fairness was the rule, not the exception. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. The wild ending? That was just the beginning.